That was such a great fireside chat. Thank you again, Dr. Ali and Neha. For those of you just tuning in, welcome. I wanted to remind you that you can submit questions at any time using the questions tab at the top of your screen. We'll be answering questions throughout the event today. And if we don't get to yours, someone on the Neo4j team will reach out to you directly, or you can send an email to webinar@neo4j.com and we'll get you pointed in the right direction. Next on the agenda today, we have Jon Brewton, founder and CEO at Data²'s, and John Stegeman, product specialist at Neo4j. They'll be discussing the best path for taking Gen AI from pilot to scalable, production-ready applications.
Well, thank you for that introduction and welcome to Connections. My name is John Stegeman from Neo4j. You can call me Steggy. And I'm joined by Jon Brewton, the CEO of Data²'s. We're super excited to talk about what Data²'s is doing. So, John, welcome.
Thanks so much, Steggy. Really appreciate it. Thanks for the forum and the opportunity to sit down today and just tell people what we're up to and how you guys are a big part of that.
Well, great. Let's start off, John. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about yourself personally, what your career arc has been, what your background is, and help us get to know you a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So Jon Brewton, founder and CEO of Data²'s. Data²'s is a service-disabled veteran-owned small business specializing in Gen AI product development and deployment. In addition to leading Data²'s, I currently serve on boards with the National Small Business Association, both in economic development and in small business technology councils. In general, my background is pretty differentiated. My professional journey into the real world started as an airman enlisted in the United States Air Force. I served as a ceremonial guardsman during that time and then transitioned into a role as a petroleums, oils, and lubricants specialist. That's kind of where I got a little bit of the itch for the oil and gas or energy industry. So shortly after I transitioned out of the military on a full-time capacity, I stayed in the reserves for 6 years. I moved into the oil and gas industry. My professional journey is a bit wild. I've lived and worked in every continent except Antarctica, so we got that one to go. Still a little bit further in the journey, but I've also lived and worked in places like Scotland, Nigeria, South Africa, Brazil, the UK, Thailand, Angola, and most recently in Australia. And I think the biggest thing that my professional journey has contributed, at least today, into how I see the world is how intelligence can be transformed to create new opportunities and deliver insights that you just can't get otherwise. And it was really that and working around that imperative for so long as an engineer in the oil and gas space that really drove me to seek out opportunities to use information in novel ways, particularly solution development in high reliability sectors like energy and defense. And so my background plays a large part in the things that we focus on a day-to-day basis, as well as the other co-founders. We have 3 common themes. From United States military service, we have worked in the energy industry, or we studied together at a variety of institutions around the world. But it's those high stakes environments and the ability to potentially rapidly analyze information that ultimately can define whether you're successful or not. And so for me, when we started Data²'s, some of our focus has been really, really geared towards ensuring that we have high reliability, high transparency, and high effectiveness from the things that we are creating for our customers. And so for us, that's really how we got to the development of the review platform and ultimately working with Neo4j.
Super exciting stuff, John. And I'm kind of jealous. I've lived and worked on a few continents myself, but not all of them. And exciting for sure. Maybe it's a good segue. Tell us about Data²'s and what you guys are up to, and what kind of problems you're trying to solve for your customers.
Yeah, look, Data²'s, as we sit today, is a leader in the generative AI market, particularly as it pertains to trust, traceability, and explainability. Our flagship platform that we created, Review, excels by integrating a bunch of really diverse data types, ensuring along the way as we integrate these things that there's full transparency into how those things are being done and ultimately how they're connected. In doing this, we really empower our clients to make confident data driven decisions with a full view of the value chain impacts associated to any one thing that they'd like to lever. And so that really creates unparalleled precision just in terms of how the models are developed, but more specifically, how you interrogate these models, use the information and the relationships between these. In these environments, we're dealing with a bunch of different data types. So we're dealing with structured, unstructured, high
Mhm.
frequency, video, transcripts. It's kind of everything, anything, all at once, and that's pretty common to high reliability industries. There's a lot of stuff that drives how we act, what we do, what we plan to, what we're required to report, and there's a lot of stuff that we capture as a byproduct of the reliability necessity of those operations so that we can get a well-rounded picture. But really connecting those things is not really simple. So I'll give one example that I think
Mhm.
is really important, or at least valid for what we're talking about now. We're lucky enough to participate in the Catalyst Accelerator program in Colorado Springs, focused on space and space domain awareness and really AI applications at broad through the Air Force Research Labs and the Naval Research Laboratory. And so we had an opportunity as a byproduct of that to try to find something novel to use information for. And we picked up an intelligence use case. Now, this intelligence use case was interesting because it's really differentiated data. It's a combination of
Mhm.
reports, high frequency transactional data, and in general, a bunch of geolocation information. And so pulling these things together in different formats and making connections between them is the job of an intelligence analyst. It's what they do on a day-to-day basis. It's how they create value and safeguard our country. And in general, that's no easy task. And these guys got together,
Mhm.
and we were able to take a case study that they use as a capstone project and really internalize all that information to see what we could do with it. Usually takes 6 analysts 6 weeks to complete their investigations, and the average score is around 75%. Um, we didn't know how we'd do, and so we wanted to really pull some information in and see what we could do. We solved that case in about 14 hours. We identified hidden connections that the author of the case wasn't even aware of in the data. And we resolved about 53 additional entities, which is about 10% more resolution in the information as a byproduct of our process. So that's roughly a 98% efficiency savings, at least in terms of the time, hours, and effort that goes into it. And so, you got to ask yourself, what kind of value would that create for your company or your business? And so that was really a jumping off period for
Yep.
us. I think a combination of things, our sector specific understanding and expertise being applied with some pretty novel approaches to data ingestion, enrichment, aggregation, and really reasoning positions us, at least within the context of the industrial sectors and high reliability environments, to give our customers the
Mhm.
right starting point and the right methods for really generating a lot of value for their business.
And John, if I could maybe, I know we've talked about that use case before with the intelligence sector, and I find it just fascinating the kinds of things that you're
Mm.
doing. But just to make it real for our audience, this is a case where you were using fictitious data, not real world data, but
Yeah.
synthetic data to try to figure out who had killed the confidential informant in the Middle East and why they were killed. Is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah, that's right. So the case study was effectively three questions you'd have to answer across this data environment. And one was who killed our confidential informant, um, whether or not that person was the person who acted on it or just financed it, and whether or not there was a secondary attack being planned as part of data this data set. And ultimately that's not a trivial task. Connecting these things and understanding
Mm-hmm.
inherently how one thing influences the other is pretty hard to ascertain. That work is not easy work. For us, it was about really testing the limitations of the system and trying to understand what we could generate out of these systems. And so we really wanted to understand a couple of things: how easily we can ingest information, load information, and connect information of different types. The second thing we really wanted to understand is how effectively we could use context to enrich some of the connections and the relationships between this information, and ultimately what that meant for our ability to recall and use that as context, and really sort of just general awareness for how we answered questions. Then we wanted to really understand how effective the fact-based reasoning methods were. I mean, obviously, we thought we had a high reliability system, and the efficacy rates on the returns are quite good, but how good, we don't know. So we wanted to really determine whether or not we could do that. And then at the end of the day, using the combination of all of these things to really deploy autonomous reasoning agents at scale across this data model, and trying to really reason at a superhuman level. I mean, just taking it back to what I said before, we didn't really know what the answer to that would be whenever we got started with this use case. Solving something in about 2% of the time it normally takes to better than 100% resolution was a bit of an eye opener for us. And so that use case in and of itself is very, very interesting because it's allowed us to really
Mm-hmm.
iterate on how we structure data, how we test data, how we deem relevancy, and ultimately what that means for the sort of superhuman capability to reason in
Mm-hmm.
really incredible ways. It really is quite impressive.
I agree with you. Every time you talk about it, I just am just kind of amazed at what you can do with technology and what seems to be kind of a non-technology problem. It seems to be much more of a human problem. Maybe so.
Yeah.
You talked a little bit about the fact that you're using Neo4j and that you're using generative AI kind of technologies, and those are two technologies that our audience is super interested to hear about. So maybe could you dive into that a little bit? So what part does Neo4j play in that platform? What part does generative AI play in that platform? And maybe expound on that just a little bit.
Yeah, in general, I'll kind of go back to where we started. These tools were quite new a year ago when we got together, the other co-founders and myself, and said, "Hey, let's see what we can do with some of this new tooling. What does that mean for our ability to derive new insights and connect new things?" We had some background with knowledge graphs in the past. One of our co-founders, Jeff
Mm-hmm.
Dalglish, our chief technology officer, was one of the original members of Mana, which was a knowledge graph company. Not too dissimilar, at least from a graph database management system perspective, to Neo4j. That's the ground they were trying to cut. They were energy specific, and I've kind of worked on both sides of that equation. So it was really trying to take what we already knew was a fundamental advantage in how you can actually store and connect information in the graphical sort of structure, and try to see if we could leverage these new tools in a certain way to derive new insights. And I think one of the bigger things that we really tried to do was find a partner to help us. We needed to find a way to do something slightly different. Relational databases and triple stores just couldn't handle the complexity and scale required on what we would like to do from an oil and gas perspective, or just in general information fidelity perspective. So we needed a solution that could seamlessly integrate and help us enable us to analyze different data types. And that's ultimately how we found Neo4j. Now, from a Gen AI perspective, like, what we're doing is we're using commercially available technologies to really help us find the right solutions. I think what sets Data²'s apart from other Gen AI solution providers is really the fact that we're not grounded to a single LLM. We're not grounded to a single technology. We're not grounded to an approach. What we really tried to do is take the best features and the best tooling available from various platforms and create a system that's interconnected across this landscape to really deliver very specific and unique capabilities and competencies. So our flexible architecture approach really helps enable our ability to be agile and to derive the right insights from the right systems at the right time. We routinely test some of these systems to see which ones are generating the best answers, which ones respond to the best context, which ones generate the best outcomes based on the data types themselves. And I think taking that approach really opens up the aperture for us to be applied in a significantly meaningful way, regardless of your data environment and what you're doing. But just to go back to one of the things that you said, like Neo4j has been an incredible partner for us. They really have been a thought partner. Their graph database technology provides flexible and scalable infrastructure, allows us to model really complex relationships. And I think the bigger thing for us outside of some of the technical enablement is just the relationships that we've been able to generate with Neo4j. Incredible group of people. I think some of the things that have happened in the last several months have really delivered a lot of value. I think some of the partnerships that you guys have chased and really established with the cloud service provider cohort really enable us to maintain some platform agnostic approach and how we're really attacking the market. And so for us, it was a combination of the technical capabilities, I think the brand, the relationships that we get from it, and ultimately what that means for us to build transparent, trustable AI solutions that are not only powerful, but have real reliability and explainability behind them. And I think it's that marriage between these things where the real value starts to be created.
And when, you've talked, John, about knowledge graphs, which is, kind of the whole topic of this connections event. And I suspect there's people listening to us today who say, I kind of get it. I mean, knowledge graphs sound interesting, but I'm not really sure what is it that they do for me. So maybe could you help us understand what exactly the knowledge graph, what part does it play in what you're doing, and how is it helping your customers and helping you to deliver what you deliver?
Yeah, I think it's a couple of things. Like in general, we as an approach take both structured, unstructured data, and we really start to apply it to a database model that scales in both of those directions. And in general, that's not easy to do, especially when you're talking about like the differentiation in how these things are stored. So knowledge graphs really allow us to seamlessly ingest and integrate large volumes of both structured and unstructured data and map it accurately into a database model that I think has a couple of inherent value propositions. In general, you get a graphical representation of your data landscape, how things are connected, why they're connected in general, and what that means for, what you should leverage for your modeling, your decisions, and the way that you interrogate that information. But it really just serves as a rich, interconnected repository of your information, which allows sort of ease of interrogation. And I think on the other end of that, it really allows for like timely synthesis of information. And I know that for us, the ability to distill broad, differentiated, bifurcated data into this format allows us to sort of inherently see the value of the connections between this information. But how does that help us in general in terms of what we like to do? What it allows people to do is pose complex queries and ultimately systems to generate precise context aware responses for those users. So you can ask really complicated questions because of the underlying structure of the data model, the connections within, the understood relationships between data in general, not necessarily domain or problem specific, but how this landscape, this system, these things really connect, allows us to leverage really the most relevant information to the query that we're posing and generate the most context aware, rich, and valuable response to any of those questions. And so I think the database model and the structure of it are fundamental to what we're trying to do. And they fundamentally enable our ability to do some of the advanced reasoning things that I think make Data²'s very different within this landscape.
Yeah, and maybe we could share something that you and I've discussed in the past with our audience, and just kind of the example questions. And I remember when I heard this example from you, you've seen the little meme with the mind exploding, and that's kind of what I was sharing that internally with the team on the call, that meme, because it just blew my mind, the kinds of questions that you were able to ask of a knowledge graph. So let's talk about the question. And if I recall correctly, the question was something like, if you were the terrorist, which node in the knowledge graph would you delete to best hide your tracks? So could you maybe talk about that, that question? And I know you shared with me some follow-ons to that
Yeah.
question. Maybe you could share those with our audience and kind of blow their minds as well.
Yeah, I think the fun part about what we're doing right now is we actually don't know the limitations of the tools that we're playing with at the moment. It's a new and ever changing landscape and world around us, and as a byproduct of that, new features, functionalities, capabilities are being sort of breathed into life on a day-to-day basis. But one of the things that we always wanted to figure out is, could we gamify data environments in a way where we could do scenario and perspective modeling on top of these environments. And our initial returns on the intelligence use case, and how quickly we solved that, we got to the R&D phase of what we wanted to do pretty quickly. And we were able to ask the system pretty interesting questions. So like one of those, we prompted the system, like using the context provided, the structure and the relationships within, please leverage the relevancy of the relationships between this. But I want you to take the perspective of the financier or perpetrator of the killing of our informant and the planning of the subsequent attack, and try to figure out how we can really gamify the system and try to understand where our weak links are and where the direct paths to being caught exist. And we were able to say something along the lines of, if you were Ahmed Darzi, again, this is all fictional data, I just want to clarify that again. If you were Ahmed Darzi and you didn't want to get caught for the crimes that you certainly committed and helped bring to life, what pieces of evidence would you take out of the equation, or what people would you remove from this chain of logic to ensure that you couldn't directly be implicated in the execution of these crimes? The answers we got back were really interesting, because it was able to say things like, the most important pieces of evidence to be removed from the system to remove direct line of sight culpability for these actions are bank account transactions linking to bank accounts XYZ. These are represented in nodes 534, 544, 555. The knowledge graph also shows that the informant Janak, and this is kind of the interesting part, the informant Janak has some damning information and reporting about your roles and responsibilities in the space, and eliminating him from the equation would remove the link between the human intelligence and his first party understanding of what took place and your responsibility for the financing and really the commission of these crimes. And so the systems themselves have the ability to do fairly amazing things if given the right context, the right relevancy from a data perspective, And all of that contextual awareness creates this ability to take the perspective of somebody or to really generate another scenario. One of the follow-on questions that we asked and we sought some clarity on was, okay, well, assume that Hamid Darzi was caught for the things that he did, and I'm another bad actor in the area, and I want to pick up where he left off. Who can I go to finance these crimes, the next terrorist attack? And ultimately, who's the best resource around to facilitate those conversations? And the answers are on the order of something to the effect of, well, this is a warlord in the area who's been known to work with another man who's a connector, and the connector really works to facilitate multiple front businesses that we launder and facilitate transactions for and through for any of the illicit activities that you want to commit. Also, he's right down the road from where you are currently. So if you got in a car and you drove over, it would probably be the best use of your time. You could get there quicker. And I think that's a really interesting answer because it's scenario modeling something that doesn't exist within the data. But what you're asking is if I was not a part of this data, but I wanted to participate within this environment, which is effectively a living environment as you query, how do I operate in that space most effectively? Who do I target conversations with? Where do I drive to? What are we having a conversation about? What is the history of this person's actions? And being able to interrogate that really allows you to scenario model at a significantly deeper level than we initially assumed was possible. And so this is an area for us where we really started to lean in on the other side of the fence in the commercial application space and just trying to understand how we could use the systems to ascertain what information they have. Ultimately, what that tells us about our performance in an oil and gas context. And then I think more importantly, set a landscape around how you traditionally solve problems, all the inputs, the outputs, the variables that are required, the calculations that are deployed, and taking that holistic view of the picture, saying, here's everything on a board right now. You see the entire chessboard. You see the connections about what we've done, how it's responded, and what that means for your performance, your efficiency, and your optimization opportunities. Take that all into account. Optimize the system for me. Tell me what assets to get rid of. Tell me where to operate with more intensity, where to operate with less intensity, how to ship barrels from one environment to the other, how to reduce our total cost, increase our total revenues, and really optimize the system at whole. So it's really value chain thinking at scale. So you're not looking at an individual facet of your business, an individual operation, but you're sort of looking in the operational context at that specific thing that you're trying to solve for and everything it touches, and really being able to scenario model around every aspect of that. Every individual element is sort of the next frontier of the things that we think are possible. But as an example, I mean, that's just one example. If we save our current client 1% of their annual operating expense and increase their revenues by 1%, that represents around $45 million in real value. And so, like, there are real dollars to be had here. And I think in these larger companies, in these larger contexts, especially where you have bifurcated deployed operations, central locations where a lot of management functions are executed and not a direct connection between these two things, your ability to take a value chain enabled view of your business at scale is nearly impossible. And what we're doing is approaching these things at a system level. We can map the inputs, the outputs, the assets, the relationships, how they respond, and theoretically do some modeling around how they might respond. Well, now we have like every piece of the puzzle so that we can really optimize the entire business at scale. And that's a meaningful like point of differentiation from, I think, how typically people approach analytics use cases and the application of tools like this.
Yeah. John, thanks so much for sharing with us today. It's amazing how you've been able to draw connections between things that seemingly are so different, defense and intelligence and oil and gas exploration, but they really all kind of the connection there is in how you store and organize and access data in a knowledge graph, and how I appreciate you sharing with us how you've been able to do that. In the 30 seconds or so that we have left, what advice would you give to the audience who may be just getting started with knowledge graphs at their company? What advice would you give them based on what you've learned over the past 12 months or so?
Yeah, I'd start with call Neo4j, specifically Staggy. Look him up. This guy's going to help you. No, but in general, look, I think, despite me being a little bit facetious there, it's true. You guys are experts in this space. So I think for me, especially when approaching a new problem area or a new thing, I usually tend to look for who are the experts in this space and what can they tell me about what I can do and what are the applications for the thing that I'm trying to solve. So going straight to the people that know it best is usually a good piece of advice that I'd like to give people. But in general, think about it in terms of what the benefit potentially is for integrating diverse data types from different, functional silos in your business, and what that connection potentially means for your ability to generate value and to really save on how you operate your assets, your business, your expense deployment in a much more meaningful way. So I think about knowledge graphs as an interconnected database. There's like real relevancy and understanding about the landscape around you. Seek out experts that understand this space well so they can elevate your starting point and how you think about graph applications and how you apply them in general for how you want to test the application in your environment. I'd say in general, and this is just a personal opinion, if you work in an environment that is very differentiated, very bifurcated, disaggregated from a geolocation perspective, like this database model is a key to understanding your business at a much more granular level than you can see today. And just being able to see it creates an opportunity to improve it. And for me, I think that's probably the most important thing that I take away from the application of graphs in this context. It also helps that they fully enable your ability. I think we're a little bit different in how we do it, but your ability to just reason with retrieval augmented generation, you have the ability to use graph RAG applications with a high degree of efficacy. What we do is slightly different because we're looking at engineering context, and the efficacy needs to be very, very, very high. So we're doing some bespoke things to make that happen. But in general, there's not a better application for how you can store structured data and then how you can retrieve, recall, and interrogate that data than I think knowledge graphs create. And I think it's going to be the critical enabler for scale for generative AI as we move forward over the next couple of years.
Well, John, thank you once again. I appreciate your time, and I'm sure our audience has enjoyed this talk as much as I have. So this has been Jon Brewton from Data²'s. Thank you so much.
Thank you.